Belem, who is a staff threat research engineer at Material Security, doing a talk on authorized but unwatched what 22,332 OAuth applications reveal about the agentic attack surface.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Before I get into the data, I want to do something for me, like pull up your phone and go to settings. I will give you some time here. And once you are already in the settings, go to privacy. And then go to permissions. Now, how many apps have access to your contacts? Your camera, maybe, your location, your microphone. Now ask yourself and be honest. When did you last open half of those apps? There is probably one you don't even remember downloading. Some tool you needed maybe once for a trip. Maybe an app someone recommended for food. Something you installed, used twice, and completely forgot about. But it still has access to your contacts. It still knows where you are. You never went back to revoke it. Because why would you? You forget it existed. Now take that feeling and apply it to 22,000 OAuth applications connected to enterprise Google Workspace environments with access to company email, calendars, files, and organizations directories. Same pattern, same psychology, way higher stakes. That's what these investigations uncovered. So now let's get into it. If your organization were breached tomorrow, how much authority would an attacker inherit through the OAuth applications already authorized by your users? We spent a lot of time thinking about how to prevent breaches. And we should, don't get me wrong. But over the last year, while researching AI applications and OAuth, I found myself asking a different question. What happens after someone clicks allow? Every AI assistant, coding assistant, meeting assistant, every browser agent enters the enterprise the same way, through an OAuth authorization. So we analyzed thousands of OAuth-connected applications across enterprise Google Workspace to understand how delegated authority changed over time. What was discovered wasn't just an OAuth story. It was a story about how delegated authority quietly accumulates and how that can increase the impact of a future breach. Most of us has been using OAuth for years, but something important changed. We stopped using OAuth primarily to connect applications to. Now we are using it to delegate authority to AI. Every time someone connects an AI assistant to Gmail or gives a coding assistant access to Drive or allows an agent to interact with calendars, documents, or contacts, they are making a trust decision. The protocol hasn't changed, but the amount of authority we are delegating through it has. That's why we wanted to understand what these trust decisions look at a scale. So the question became, what happens to those trust decisions after someone clicks allow? Every OAuth authorization starts the same way. A user reviews the requested permission and decides whether to trust the application. That decision usually takes less than 30 seconds. But what happened after that? Does anyone ever go back and ask, is this application still needed? Does it still deserve this level of trust? Has anything changed? Now you can remember your phone. To answer those questions, we needed a large and diverse dataset. Our investigations analyzed 26,527 OAuth authorization records, which we normalized into more than 22,000 OAuth-connected applications across 21 enterprise Google Workspace. From there, we examined AI adoption, application permissions, dormancy, identity lifecycle, vendor lifecycle, and application context. We didn't know what we were going to find. We simply followed the data. We wanted to understand what happens to those decisions over time. As we started analyzing the data, we realized something interesting. Every answer led us to another layer of the same story. The first pattern appeared almost immediately. AI adoption wasn't growing gradually. We know that. It was accelerating. 91% of the AI application in our dataset first appeared during the last 16 months. By itself, that isn't necessarily a security problem. Organizations should be adopting AI. That's how innovation happens, right? But every new AI application starts with the same moment. Someone reviewed the requested permission and make a trust decision. One application becomes 10, 10 becomes 50, 50 becomes hundreds, and suddenly you don't just have more AI, you have hundreds of trust decisions that now need to be understood and governed over time. And that made us wonder, what happens after people stop using those applications? The next thing we wanted to understand was what happened after those trust decisions got older. We found that 47% of the applications in our dataset had been dormant for more than 90 days. Now, I want to be very clear about what that means. Because dormant doesn't mean malicious. It doesn't even mean the application should be removed. But it does raise an important question. If an application hasn't been used in months, should we revisit the trust decision we made when it was first authorized? That's a question most organizations never ask. Because once someone clicks allow, that trust decision is rarely revisited. And while we were looking at this dormant application, we noticed another pattern. Some applications weren't just inactive. The people who originally authorized them weren't there anymore. Some of the trust decisions we found were tied to users who were no longer active. If this sounds familiar, it's because we have seen this problem before. Very recently, in July of this year, Apple filed a lawsuit alleging that a former employee retained access to Apple's internal system for months after termination, the result of an access grant nobody revoked. I wrote about that case because it highlighted the same governance challenge we were seeing in our own data. That offboarding gap raised an important question. Does offboarding end when an account is disabled? Or should it also include the trust decision that employee made? Our data showed this isn't an isolated case. we identified 1,064 applications where historical authorization counts exceed the current number of authorized accounts, demonstrating that the same challenge exists at scale. For me, the takeaway was very clear. Employee offboarding shouldn't focus only on identities. It should also include the trust decision those identities made. And that naturally led us to ask another question. What happens when it's not the employee that changes, but the application itself? At this point, we had seen that trust decisions can outlive application usage, and they can even outlive the employee who made them. So we ask another question. What happens when the application itself changed? We start looking at vendors' lifecycle events, such as acquisitions, product shutdowns, and ownership changes. One example immediately stood out, Clockwise. On March 27, 2026, Salesforce announced that it was shutting down the Clockwise product. Our dataset snapshot was taken on May 27. About 2 months later, we still observe Clockwise OAuth grants across all 21 enterprise environments, representing 2,303 accounts in our telemetry. That was interesting because it exposed something much bigger than Clockwise. A business event doesn't automatically trigger a trust review. If an organization wants to reevaluate whether an application should continue to be trusted, someone must make that decision. Up to this point, every trust decision we look at still had a story. Someone approved it, someone used it, something changed. Then we found something different. We found thousands of applications called Untitled Project. I bet this sounds familiar. At first, I thought this was just a naming problem, but it wasn't. Every Google app script starts with that default name. If the developer never changes, that's what users see when they are asked to trust it. Now imagine you are the security team reviewing your OAuth environment. You can see the application, but can you answer these questions? What does it do? Who created? Who owns it today? Is anyone still using it? Can I safely remove it? That problem isn't visibility anymore. The problem is that the context behind the trust decision has disappeared. And once that happens, governance becomes incredibly difficult. That's when everything started to come together. We realized we weren't looking at separate problems. We were looking at different ways organizations lose track of their trust decisions over time. Same problem, different angles. It started with AI adoption. Every new AI application requires someone to make a trust decision. Then we found that many of those trust decisions weren't being revisited after application became dormant. Then we saw that those decisions could outlive employees who made them. Then we found that could outlive the application itself. And finally, we found that some had been around for so long that nobody could explain why they existed anymore. That's when we realized this investigation wasn't never really about OAuth applications. It was about the trust decisions organizations accumulate over time. And once you see your environment through that lens, you start asking a different question. Instead of asking, how many OAuth applications do we have? You start asking, if one of our users is compromised tomorrow, how many of those trust decisions will an attacker inherit? At this point, you may be thinking this is a governance problem, maybe a process problem, something we can manage over time. And then you look at the calendar. In September 2025, a threat actor attributed to China, tracked by Mandiant as UNC 6395, compromised OAuth tokens issued to a widely used sales engagement platform called Rift. They didn't steal passwords. They didn't bypass multi-factor authentication. They didn't need to. The tokens were already there, valid, trusted, just waiting. Using those tokens, the attackers accessed Salesforce environment at more than 700 organizations. FINRA issued a cybersecurity alert. Mandiant was engaged. The Drift product was officially shut down in March 2026. Then, 7 months after the Drift breach, in April 2026, we disclosed a breach at Verso. An attacker had stolen an employee's OAuth token for a third-party AI tool called Context AI through malware on the employee device. They used that token to access Verso's Google Workspace. Again, no credential stolen, no MFA bypass, just a valid token that had already been used. Two separate incidents, two separate companies, the same mechanism. An attacker presented a credential that your environment already trusted. And I want to pause on that for a moment, because the question I always get when I describe this attack is, why didn't anyone catch it? So let me tell you what the victim's security team actually saw. No failed login attempt, no MFA prompt triggered, no account logout, no lateral movement alerts, no anomalous geographic logins, nothing in their email security flagged it, nothing in their SIEMs fired on it. What they saw was exactly what a legitimate user looks like, because the token was legitimate. It had been used by the user. It was being used through the normal API surface. Every call was authenticated. Every request was authorized. The environment had no way to distinguish between the real user and the attacker holding their token. That's what makes this attacker class fundamentally different from credential theft. When an attacker steals a password, your controls have a chance to catch them. MFA fires, the login looks unusual, something trips. When an attacker steals an OAuth token, your controls were never designed to catch that, because the trust decision was already made. That's why we started this investigation. And that's exactly why what we found mattered. Because the question isn't whether this attacker is theoretical anymore. It's whether the trust decisions already made in your environment have been reviewed lately. This investigation changed the way I think about OAuth security. Before, I would have asked, how do we prevent users from authorizing risky applications? And that is still an important question, don't get me wrong. But after looking at this data, I think there is another question that is just as important. If a breach happens tomorrow, what trust decisions already exist? What authority will an attacker inherit? Because attackers don't always have to convince users to authorize something new. Sometimes they inherit the trust that is already there. Let me make that concrete. In our dataset, we found the well-known ChatGPT Google Workspace connector, authorized across 20 enterprise environments with more than 4,000 accounts holding active grants. It holds 21 OAuth scopes. So let's go through them. Gmail, the Gmail modify scope, which Google classified at its highest sensitivity tier, by the way. Reading, archiving, labeling, and modifying every message in the account. Inbox, sent, draft, spam, trash, every thread, every attachment reference, all of it, silently, with no notification to the user when access occurs. What about calendars? 5 calendar scopes, including full read and write access to every event, every meeting on the account, every attendee, every agenda item written into the description field, the video call link, who was there, when they met, contacts, the user full contact list, and their other contacts, the social graph Google builds automatically from email history. Everyone they have ever emailed, organized by frequency and recency. Directory, every employee in the organization, names, email addresses, job titles, departments, managers. What about Drive? Every file the user has access to, not just files they recently opened. Every shared drive they belong to. Every document shared with the team. Every archive project folder. No filtered by recency, no filtered by relevance, all of it. Google Docs, Sheets, and Slides, full read and write. This is one application, one consent screen, just one click. The user who authorized this probably spent less than 30 seconds on the screen, and the grant persists until they explicitly go back and revoke it, which most people never use. An attacker has that token. They don't need to send a phishing email. They don't need to call the help desk. They don't need to be inside your network. They have everything that user can see and some of what they can change. That's what inherit trust means. That's the question we are really trying to answer. So, what can organizations do today? Based on everything we found, there are 3 practical actions that can make a meaningful difference. Throughout this investigation, every discovery pointed us towards a practical improvement. The first is to include OAuth review in your offboarding process. Offboarding shouldn't end when an account is disabled. It should also include reviewing the trust decision that employee made while they were in the organization. 60 days after clockwise shutdown, 2,303 accounts across all 21 environments still help authorize grants. Offboarding didn't catch a single one. In practice, this means adding one line to your offboarding checklist. Not a new process, not a new tool, just a line that says, review and revoke OAuth grant tied to this account before closing it. The teams that owns offboarding, whether that's IT, security, or HR, needs to know that suspending an account is not the same as revoking the trust decisions that account made. Those are 2 separate steps. And right now, most organizations are only doing one of them. The second is to capture ownership and purpose when a new AR application is approved. The Untitled Project finding made one thing very clear. Visibility is not enough. If nobody knows who owns an application or why it was approved, it becomes very difficult to make informed decisions later. The fix doesn't have to be complicated. 3 fields: who approved it, what business purpose it serves, when it should be reviewed next. That's it. You don't need a dedicated tool to start. A shared spreadsheet with those 3 columns is more useful than an OAuth environment where none of that information exists. The goal is not perfect governance on day one. The goal is making sure that 6 months from now, someone can answer the question, why does this application have access to our environment? And finally, review dormant authorizations on a regular basis. Dormant doesn't automatically mean unnecessary, but it should prompt a conversation. Is this application still serves a business purpose? Has anything changed since we first trusted it? The oldest dormant grant in our dataset has not been active for more than 566 days. The application it belongs to has full Gmail access. Nobody has reviewed it. 90 days is a reasonable threshold to start with. Any application that crosses it should trigger one question. Does anyone still need this? If the answer is yes, document it and move on. If the answer is no, revoke it. But if nobody can answer the question, then that's your highest priority. Because an application without an owner is an application without accountability. An application without accountability is exactly the kind of trust decision an attacker is counting on you to forget about. None of these recommendations are about slowing AI adoption. They are about making sure our trust decisions continue to reflect today's business, not yesterday's. I would like to leave with one final thought. We start this investigation trying to understand OAuth application. But as usual, somewhere along the way, the investigation changed. We realized we weren't really studying applications. We were studying trust decisions. Every OAuth authorization represents decisions to trust an application. Most of those decisions are completely reasonable. But over time, business change, employees leave, applications are no longer being used, vendors are acquired, products are discontinued. The question isn't whether your organization should adopt AI, because everybody knows that it should. The question is whether the trust decisions you made 6 months ago or 2 years ago still reflects your business today. Because if a breach happens tomorrow, an attacker won't just inherit your environment. They will inherit the trust decisions you have already made. Thank you.